Margaret awoke, startled, a cold sweat clinging to her. She gathered her thoughts.
Hello, my name is Zachariah Van Sliders with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to yet another horrible game review. Horrible for the quality of the review, not necessarily the quality of the game. So disclaimers, I do this part-time, I'm a house dad, I do not do this professionally, at least not yet, so I'm not going to go back and edit it and change it. I might pause, I might speak poorly, probably am going to speak poorly. We're just going to deal with it. Number 2, I do not give video games scored reviews. I don't believe in them. I think video games is one of the most subjective forms of art. Therefore, I will give you an overview of what the game is, the pros and cons from my point of view, and then whether or not I will be continuing to play it past the purposes of this review. And finally, I don't play this game as much as other reviews, other undipped reviews. I don't have a ton of time, so this is kind of an everyman's look at it. I play as many hours as I can before the review, and I just kind of a snapshot of the game. So I urge you, if I'm not giving you enough, to seek out a more in-depth review on the internet for all the nuts and bolts of it. So, that all out of the way, today's game is The Children of Morta. It is an 11-bit studio game, and it is very interesting. We're going to get into it. First of all, 11-bit, I'm a big fan of them. They created Moonlighter, so I was hoping for big things with this, and they did not disappoint. The story of Children of Morta is where we're going to start. It's a very basic story. Basically, some ancient evil gets, awakened, and then these semi-medieval family is the only thing standing in the way. Now, it has one player or couch co-op for 2 players. Basically, you select a member of the family, then you go into a dungeon that is procedurally generated for the most part. You move through that dungeon and try and destroy everything in it, and of course get through it and out of it. If you don't, you're taken back to the family's home. The entire game's story is narrated by one voice, which kind of is reminiscent of Bastion, if anybody out there played that, which I find that really interesting too. The narrator does a great job, and because it's just the one voice over things that you're seeing, it's very streamlined to exactly the content that they want to show you. The story never gets muddled in side communications or side dialogue. It's very straightforward. That is to say that it's not simple. The story is really good and really complex, and it delves into this family unit, that these kind of like hermit people that live in the woods, and they're the only people to stand against the corruption. Now, as you play it, you will unlock more dungeons by actually successfully completing the dungeons, but the interesting thing about this game is whether or not you complete a dungeon successfully, each time you go through, more storyline stuff happens, both in the dungeon from procedural generation and also outside the dungeon, which gives you this feeling that the game is constantly being progressed, whether or not you're actually progressing. In the same right, the characters, you start with 2, there's 6 total to play. I managed to unlock 4 in my time with the game before this review. And the characters, I managed to unlock 2, giving me a total of 4 to play. You start with 2 available to you. And these characters are unlocked through the story progression, which isn't necessarily tied to your progression in the game. So each time you either succeed or fail in a dungeon, the story is returned to the home of the Bergsons, which are your hero family. The Bergsons, then there is some story element in it, even if it's just a little side tidbit that you can listen in on, or it's a full character unlock. But the story unfolds at the house, whereas that's broken up by you going into these dungeons and questing through them. Unlike Moonlighter and some other looters, you go in, you collect a lot of gold. There's other stuff you collect that make your time in the dungeon itself easier, but don't necessarily come with you. Instead, you take the gold back, and you can use it in both the grandmother, who is not a playable character's kind of laboratory wizardry place to upgrade some passive skills, and then you can go to the workshop, the kind of battle-hardened uncle who doesn't do anything other than work. He has like your basic combat boosts, such as damage and armor and that sort of thing, that you can purchase with the gold. In addition to that, each character levels up solo. So if you take Lydia in, the daughter, she will gain experience from that run through, whereas the other characters won't. However, what is interesting is every character, as you build them, get these synergy bonuses. These kind of, as you level up a character, they give all the family members this boost. Like, for example, the one brother who is the martial artist, I believe Mark was him, when you get him to level 4, all of the Bergson's movement speed is increased around the bend, and you don't have to spend points in that. Each level, of course, gives you an ability point, and you use that to buy abilities, both passive and active, for each character as well. So, I think that basically covers the overview without going into any sort of spoiler territory. So let's move into the pros. Let's go positive first. And I got a lot of pros with this game, but let's start with the dynamic storytelling. I want to say that having the story progress, whether or not you are successful, really gives this game kind of a magic to it. The fact that I always feel like I'm progressing the story just by playing instead of actually accomplishing things also allows it to not get stagnant. I am wondering, because I haven't gotten all the way through it, I'm wondering when that storyline in the house, if ever, wears off. Because there's got to be a point where, like, you've done all the story there that you can do before you progress in the game. There has to be some sort of balance, but for the most part, I died many times in the first dungeon. Many times, which we're going to get into in the cons. So many times that the third character unlocked himself through story progression of me returning to the Bergson's family. Which is interesting, because the third character was the one that I found the easiest to actually defeat that dungeon. So it's really, that's one of the really key pros I want to say, is just that dynamic storytelling. The next pro is the wide range of how the characters work. So far, like I said, I unlocked 2 characters, giving me a total of 4. You have John, the father, who is a sword and shield knight all the way. You have Lydia, the eldest sister. She's an archer, bow type ranger character. You have the youngest son, who's the third unlocked. He is like a speedy assassin rogue type character. And then Mark was the 4th one that I unlocked. There's 2 other ones that I have not unlocked yet, but Mark is a close combat monk martial artist type character. One thing I noticed about this that really was interesting is every one of these characters feels completely different in the mechanic, which is really hard to do in a game like this. Of course, you can give them all different powers and different weapons, but that doesn't always make a character feel different. With this, the very mechanics that define how the character attacks, defends, moves are different, while still incorporating the same basic button layout, and it's only like 2 or 3 buttons that you ever really have to use for the base skills, and that's really interesting. To give an example of this, John has a shield that allows him to defend and absorb a lot of stuff while he attacks, so he wants to be close and in the combat, whereas Lydia, all of her stamina revolves around moving and shooting at the same time and managing that stamina. While as then you have Kevin, who actually, as he hits, gets faster movement speed, and he actually does this half step forward when he swings his assassin blades, so he can actually kind of like chain jump from bad guy to bad guy. Each one has their strengths and their weaknesses, and I found it very interesting that they worked in that way. I also think Another pro of this game is the synergy abilities really give it something special. It makes you want to play other characters. It makes you want to play the whole family. And it all leads into this overarching story that they're telling here, that this family is a unit, even though you're only playing one of them, that this family's all together. Okay, so let's go into the cons. Let's get a little negative. My number one con is the difficulty of the dungeon, at least to start. And I think that's because they meant it in a way that you're supposed to go in and lose and get more equipment to go back in to do it again. I think the idea behind the story is kind of a war of attrition. Just keep doing it and don't give up. And while they do a great job of keeping you engaged with the storyline being constantly progressing, whether or not you're winning or losing, it still irritated me to lose 14 times in that first dungeon. I felt like that. And I feel like that first dungeon is really impossible until you level that stuff up. I'm sure there's guys out here who can do it, but for the level of difficulty that it was at, I was a little bummed. And again, as you upgrade, it gets easier. I went through the second dungeon without actually dying. So there's that. But the first dungeon was just so hard. I'd get to that boss and it'd wipe me out every time. My second con is I understand that they're trying to tell a story, and that's why the characters don't unlock right away. I also like that I don't have to do some special ridiculous thing to unlock the characters off the beaten path. I can just let them come naturally through the story. But I like variation, and the fact that I could only play one of two characters of the total 6 in the beginning was kind of a bummer to me. Like, I like the variation, I like trying the new characters, and it would have made those 14 or 15 deaths right off the bat a little bit easier if each time I was trying a different character and finding out what they do and how they act. The other thing that's a little irritating about the unlock system is when the characters unlock, they unlock at 0. And I believe that this is supposed to promote you going back to the previous dungeons with them and leveling them up to extend the life of the game. But at the same time, it's a little irritating when I'm progressing forward. I want to do the next quest, but at the same time, I just unlocked this new family member that has no power whatsoever and will die immediately on it unless I go back and at least run 1 or 2 dungeons with him. This is compounded by the fact that to really give these guys the power, they all have to kind of level up at the same time. So to have a bunch of them locked and you can't level them up, it really hampers you, and it gives you this kind of feeling of taking away when you're you're getting through it, and then all of a sudden you've got to go back to kind of bring this new character into the fold that you should be excited to get, not necessarily kind of bummed. Okay, so that brings us to the final thing, whether or not I'm going to stick with it, and I gotta say, I'm definitely going to stick with it. The cons that I just gave are nowhere near enough to outweigh how good this is, and how simple it is, and this is a kind of game that I just love when it comes to indie games. It's great, simple, poignant storytelling with a simple, good, but in-depth mechanic of how you fight and move through it. So, I'm not going to lie, I might even 100% it, especially since all of the 4 characters, while I do have my favorites, I find interesting enough to want to actually go back and level them up and try and get them to their max. So this might be a game I end up 100%ing. I do have a penchant for 100%ing those indie games when the time comes. So, in my opinion, 11-Bit Studios has done it again. This is a great game. It's like a game if Bastion, Moonlighter, and I don't know, maybe Enter the Gungeon had a baby. It's a great independent game, and if you have Games Pass, check it out. I didn't say it at the top of the show, this is a pretty old game. The reason I'm reviewing it is it just hit Games Pass this week. So, I hope this helps some people out there. I hope some people check out this game. It's a really good game, really fun. I wish I could try out the couch co-op. I think that would be a really fun aspect of it. So, that's been it. That's been the Horrible Review. I'm Old Man Gaming. You can check out everything my channel has to offer. Reviews every Monday. My Borderlands 3 playthrough with the soonly becoming star, Philbilly330. We also have a podcast every Friday. And then, of course, you can check out Philbilly's build videos. This is the exclusive place for that. So, as long as you guys keep watching and listening, we will keep making these. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.